Well, hey everyone, I'm Janet B., recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. Happy to see you all here. Another just quick announcement. First, a big thank you to Maura, who posts our recordings on Podbeam. They could be found at recoverygam.podbean.com. And a big thanks to Victoria L., who has just set up a YouTube page for us. So it would be great if you subscribe. I'm not, we'll probably keep doing Podbean also, but not sure. But she put up a really pretty YouTube site. So if you just go on YouTube and search for Recovery Jam, there we are. And here we are tonight. And I am going to talk about Bill's story, first chapter in the big book. Last week we did Dr. Bob, one of the two co-founders. Here's a story about the other. And what I love about Bill's story is it talks about 10 things he tried to do to recover that didn't work. And then he finally found the one thing that worked for him and that ultimately works for all addicts. So if you have your big book, Bill's story opens right on page 1. And he starts out talking about how he has to go to war. He says, I was part of life at last. And in the midst of excitement, I discovered liquor. Later on, he says, I forgot the strong warnings and prejudices of my people concerning drink. I was lonely and again turned to alcohol. So here's a couple things that didn't help him. Number one, changing circumstances. Things were really bad. That's when he turned to alcohol. He was lonely. He turned to alcohol. And he said when he was part of life, when things were good, he turned to alcohol. So if we think changing our circumstances is going to help us recover, it probably won't. I know for myself, I binged and I thought I binged because I was miserable. And some of you may remember my story when I was 17 years old, already a full-fledged compulsive eater, in Overeaters Anonymous, unable to stop binging because I thought I was miserable. This really cute college boy invited me to the Beach Boys concert. And I was in heaven and I was as happy as could be. And I went out and binged. Um, and it didn't make sense to me. So I just said, I guess I'm binging to sabotage my happiness. But I was wrong. I didn't binge because I was miserable. And I didn't binge because I was happy and wanted to sabotage it. I binged just like Bill because I couldn't not binge. If we think circumstances or geography is going to help us, it doesn't work, right? Imagine someone with cancer saying, I think I'll move from New York to LA. That will make my cancer cells stop multiplying. Of course it won't. We take our illness with us. So the second thing he says is, I forgot the strong warnings I had heard, right? I mean, when I was little, I was taught look both ways before you cross the street. And 100% of the time when I cross the street, I look both ways. Or I had bronchitis once, and the doctor said, here's your antibiotic, take one pill twice a day. I remembered to take every single pill. But something as important as alcohol, when it had those horrible effects on Bill, he forgot those warnings. And we've talked about this before, that in people like us, the connection between our memory, right, for us of horrible binge hangovers, and our conscious mind where we make our decisions, there's a disconnect. We can't remember the pain and suffering of a day before. So our memory doesn't help us. Strong warnings don't help us. I guarantee not one of us is here because someone said, you know what, you're gaining weight. It's going to ruin your health. You're going to have a miserable life if you don't stop binging. And we said, oh, okay, I think I'll stop binging. And we just stopped. I guarantee zero of us are here because of that, right? Um, so there's Bill. He had these strong warnings. It didn't help. He went to war. He comes back from war. He goes to law school. And he says at one of the finals, he was too drunk to think or write. So I went to law school, and in most law school classes, 100% of your grade is based on that one final exam. So this is pretty important. So I would say that number 3 for Bill is necessity. Bill needed to be sober when he took his exams and he couldn't. Necessity didn't help. So all of us are told, you need to lose weight, you need to get your blood pressure down, you need to get your blood sugar under control. Necessity. It doesn't matter. Necessity doesn't work for people like us. So Bill finishes law school and he says, yeah, the law's not for me. He was interested in business. So he went into business and life was really good for a while. And then what happened? The stock market crashed and things got bad. But he was still okay for a while. He says, page 4, I was determined to win again. And the next morning, I called a friend in Montreal and went to Canada. So again, he's trying a geographic cure. He's able to stop for a short period of time until page 5, where he says, liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. It's like, I think for all of us, there's this invisible line where maybe we could stop if we really want to. But then once we cross that line, we can't stop without a miracle. Um, it would be great, right? If we knew where the line was, if I knew the line was going to come 3.5 years from now, it's like, great, I'll keep binging for 3 years and 5 months and 29 days, and then I'll stop. But we never know where that line was. I believe I crossed that line by the age of 4. So here was Bill. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. And once we cross the line where it's a necessity, we can't save ourselves anymore. We have to be rescued. It's like we're in quicksand or an undertow. We can't rescue ourselves anymore. So things get worse for our buddy Bill. He loses his house. But Bill, ever the optimist, says, but I got a new business opportunity. Things are going to work. And then he went on here's that word, prodigious bender. I don't know that word prodigious. I think it means like a really bad bender. And then his business opportunity vanished. So here he is. And what does he do? He says, I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. So he knew his alcoholic threshold. It was 0 drinks. He said, I couldn't have even one drink. This is what he said. I was through. I had written lots of sweet promises before, but my wife happily observed, this time I meant business, and so I did. So number 4, what he tried was commitment. He really meant business. Well, that doesn't help. Think of our poor cancer patient who moved from New York to LA, who's got, cancers going on and saying, you know what? Now I'm committed to make my cancer cells stop multiplying by my willpower. I mean, our hearts would break because we would know that no matter how sincere she was, she couldn't do it. The problem isn't lack of commitment. The problem is lack of power. So poor Bill, he means business, but he keeps getting drunk. And he says, bottom of page 5, I began to wonder if I was crazy, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Lack of perspective. Thinking I can do things that time and time again I should see that I can't do. I sometimes still think I have the knees of a 20-something-year-old, and I'll go out running and then I'll have to ice my knees and, just realize I can't do this. I'm not in my 20s, I'm in my 60s, and I can't work out like I'm in my 20s. But having a lack of perspective about my knees isn't really a big deal. I rest them a few days and I'm fine. But a lack of perspective about liquor or food is the hallmark of an addict, and it is deadly. So what happens? Bill walks into a cafe one day to use a telephone. Not really smart. It's like someone who's trying to get abstinent, walking into Haagen-Dazs to use the phone, which is all the way in the back of the ice cream shop. And no surprise, Bill gets drunk. But being a good addict, what does he tell himself? He says, I'll manage better next time, but I may as well get good and drunk now. So number 5 is what I call the pillow cure. I can do whatever I want now because I'll be able to put my head on a pillow. Any pillow will do for 7 hours. And suddenly that pillow will give me the power I didn't have. And I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll be fine. Well, it doesn't work. There's no magic pillow. And what does Bill say? He woke up the next day and the remorse horror, and hopelessness are unforgettable. I mean, think about those words. They make you think of like a bad Halloween, a haunted house gone bad, right? Remorse, horror, hopelessness. And usually those things would convince us to do something that we wouldn't do again, right? I grew up in Miami. We all went to the beach all the time. And I remember not putting on sunscreen because I wanted a really good tan. And to my horror, instead of like this cute little tan, my skin peeling off, my face bright red, and it was uncomfortable. That's not even horror, remorse, or hopelessness. That's just uncomfortable. But it taught me a lesson to put on sunscreen the next time I went to the beach. But for an alcoholic or a compulsive eater, remorse doesn't help. And that's number 6, remorse. What's remorse? It's feeling strong guilt, and it doesn't work. Who of us ever said, "Oh, I feel so guilty that I ate my roommate's food. I think I'll stop binging," and then was able to stop binging? Not me, not you, not any of us. Feeling hopeless doesn't do it. The only time hopelessness is good is if at the moment we feel hopeless, really hopeless, we are presented with the correct solution, which is that God is alive and well, working miracles in the lives of compulsive eaters, and He's given us this 12-step program where we start out admitting we're powerless and our lives are unmanageable, and we end up promised that we will have a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. But plain old remorse, horror, and hopelessness, that usually just ends with us feeling self-pity. And as my friend Roxanne says, pity parties usually end with cake. So for 2 more years, Bill goes on like this. He steals from his wife. You imagine the guilt he must have felt? He tries all sorts of things. He goes to a hospital and he says, page 7, understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I don't really know what that means. The goose hung high. I assume it means things were just fine. So Bill says, I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. So 2 things here Bill had. Bill had a desire, but without spiritual help. Number 7, desire. Number 8, self-knowledge. Anyone with cancer has a desire for her cancer cells to stop multiplying. Desire alone doesn't work, right? We can read page 24 of our big book says, there comes a point in the life of every abnormal drinker or eater where the most powerful desire to stop is of absolutely no avail because our problem isn't desire, it's lack of power. So Bill says this was the answer, self-knowledge. Well, self-knowledge doesn't help. We all know that. Food, we could know our exact binge foods. Well, if that was enough, all we would have to do is take a piece of paper, make a list of all our binge foods or our red light foods, and stay away from them. We wouldn't need a 12-step program. All we would need is a list. But we need a 12-step program. That list doesn't work because self-knowledge alone doesn't do it. Our problem isn't lack of knowledge. Our problem isn't lack of desire. Our problem isn't lack of a healthy food plan. Our problem is lack of power. So page 8, we see, along with the remorse, horror, and hopelessness, now Bill has added loneliness, despair, and self-pity. And how does Bill describe this bottom? He says, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And he still didn't stop because here's number 9. A first step alone does nothing. I can admit I'm powerless over food and that my life is a train wreck. That admission alone gets me nowhere, right? Some are cancer patients saying, I admit I have cancer and my life's unmanageable. She's not going to get better. A first step alone doesn't do anything. All it may do is get us motivated enough that we'll work the rest of the steps. So Bill goes to a hospital, goes to rehab, comes out. It says, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me a bit. And then he drank again. So number 10 is fear. So a doctor telling us that if we don't lose weight, we're going to have a heart attack, that won't do it. You all may have heard me say before, I met a woman once at an OA convention. She was diabetic. The doctor told her if she didn't stop eating compulsively and lose some weight, it would affect her eyes and her kidneys. When I met her, she had a seeing eye dog because she was blind, and she was on dialysis waiting for a kidney. Fear doesn't do it. So again, if we think back to cancer, if someone says to our cancer patient, if you don't make your cancer cells stop multiplying, you're probably going to die. Do they say, oh, thanks for the information. Now I'm really scared. I'm in fear. Okay, now I'll make my cancer cells stop multiplying. That never happens. Fear doesn't do it. It's not a tool of this program. Fear isn't from God, so it can't help. So here's poor Bill. He has tried everything and he realizes the gravity of his situation. He says, everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would and have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. But now there's a turn in our story. He says, how dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch, his last binge. Bill says, I was soon to be catapulted. I love that word catapulted. Not I took myself, I rescued myself. I was catapulted. I was rescued. He says, I was catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. Can you imagine? What's the fourth dimension? But that's not even think of it. It's like Dorothy when she goes from black and white to color, like a different dimension. And he's before he had loneliness, despair, and self-pity. And what does he now get in recovery? Happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Because just like the illness is progressive, recovery is progressive. Once we get to recovery and start living this way of life, it just keeps getting better and better. So let's find out how God launched the search and rescue mission for Bill Wilson. So it's November. It's fall, just starting to get a little cool in the air. Bill's sitting in his kitchen, drinking, and the phone rang. And it's an old drinking buddy of his, asking if he can come over. Bill was in New York at the time. His friend Ebby didn't live in New York. It had been years since Ebby even been to New York, but Ebby just happened, I say quotes, just happened to be in New York and just happened to call Bill and say, hey, can I come over? And Bill's like, sure. He didn't care about Ebby. He just thought we could drink together. Great. I don't have to drink by myself anymore. This is wonderful. So remember, he was drinking and planning on drinking more when he shows up at his door. Now, what didn't he do? He didn't say, Bill, you're drinking. I'll come back when you have 48 hours sober. He didn't do that. He didn't wait for Bill to reach him out. And by the way, Bill didn't do that to Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was drunk and planning on staying drunk when he met Bill. So Ebby went in and he talked to him. And Bill said, there's something different about this guy. And he pushed a drink across the table to Ebby and said, here, have a drink. And Ebby said, no, thank you. And Bill's like, what's got into this guy? He wasn't himself. He didn't look like himself. He didn't act like himself. Well, of course not. A butterfly doesn't look like a caterpillar anymore. Ebby had been transformed. You all, God isn't in the fix it up a little bit business. God is in the transformation business. We're talking caterpillar to butterfly stuff. So Bill says, what's going on? And Ebby just says, I've got religion. No sugarcoating God. No saying, well, if I mention the word God, Bill may not be interested. So let me tell him he can make a doorknob his higher power. He just said, I've got religion. And so what is religion? It doesn't have anything to do with churches or clergymen. It's the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God. That's the dictionary definition. So when we say God as I understand him, it's not doorknob as I understand him, or light bulb as I understand him, or even group as I understand it, because the definition is the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal God. Now, I might conceive of God differently than you conceive of God. That's fine. But I think we can all agree that a light bulb is not a superhuman controlling power, and I certainly can't worship a doorknob. So Ebby didn't sugarcoat God. He didn't dummy it down so it would appeal to Bill. He didn't give God some pet name. He just said, I've got religion. And Bill says, I was aghast. Like, what the heck? He was an alcoholic crackpot. Now he's a religious crackpot. Said, but whatever, let him rant. My gin's going to last longer than his words. But Ebby didn't rant. He just quietly said he'd been drunk, so drunk he was about to be committed for alcoholism. Two men appeared in court and persuaded the judge to suspend his commitment. One of the men who was persuading the judge was a recovered alcoholic, and the judge just happened to be his uncle. And he said, Uncle, Judge, give us a little time. We know what can help him. A combination of two things: a simple religious idea. Imagine they use that word in court, right? A simple religious idea and a practical program of action. Do God's will as best you can, trust him with the outcome, clean up the past, and help others. Ebby said that was 2 months ago, and the results were self-evident. It worked 2 months. So that means anyone who is sitting here binging, by September 14th, you can be the Ebby walking into someone's life. 2 months, sometimes even less. So there's Ebby. He's thinking, he's 60 days after that day in court, he's thinking, who can I help? It's like, I'm in New York in business. Let me call my old drinking buddy, Bill. So anyone who's binging now, remember, you can be someone's Ebby in 2 months. You can be the butterfly that they're looking at. So Bill reports that Ebby came to pass his experience on if Bill cared to have it. And Bill said, I was shocked, but I was interested. Page 10. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So if someone comes around and doesn't feel hopeless, it's like, yeah, it'd be nice to lose 10 pounds or so, but yeah, whatever. They're probably not going to be interested because this program is a lot of work. But when someone is hopeless, we want them to feel hopeless. We don't want to tell people, oh, don't worry, it'll get better. You know what? It doesn't just get better on its own. I was going to meetings when I first started. I was just shy of my 16th birthday. Then I learned how to throw up, I don't know, twice a week. 6.5 years later, in Overeaters Anonymous, I was throwing up my esophagus. It didn't get better just by going to meetings. This illness is progressive, and meetings alone don't stop the progression. So here's Bill, and Ebby's talking to him about God, and Bill says, I always believed in a power greater than myself. I often pondered these things. But when it came to a God personal to me who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut. So he believed in God, but I think he was what I was, a practical agnostic. I always believed in God, but it made no difference in my life, except when I wanted something, I treated God like my servant or like a genie in the bottle, right? Come out of your bottle, give me what I want, then go back in your bottle and leave me alone. But God made no difference in my life. It's like, I believe there's a king in England, but it's irrelevant to me. I mean, I guess if I move to Great Britain, I'd make a difference. It doesn't matter that I believe the King of England exists. And I was like, Bill, I believed in God. I wasn't really interested in anything he had to say to me. In fact, I didn't think he cared enough to say anything to me. But how did Ebby describe God to Bill? Love, superhuman strength, and direction. Look at those three clues about God. So if anyone's like not sure that there is a God or what God's like, this is how the founder of AA first heard about God: love, superhuman strength, and direction. And no matter what we learned about God in our childhood or, religion class or whatever, things that we think, made no sense. How could we get upset about a God who's love, superhuman strength, and direction? That's all we need to know about God to start. That's all we need to know. Wouldn't wouldn't you? Wouldn't I love a God like that who took care of me? Love, superhuman strength, and direction. That's what we need. God, we have access to all three: love, power, and guidance. So Bill talks about the role that religion played in his life. He says, yeah, with religion, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. And isn't that how a lot of us use religion or even the 12 steps? We'll do the parts that are convenient and not too hard. And yeah, we don't really need to do the rest because we're just a little bit different. So Bill had to start doing some soul searching. He was saying, okay, I want to believe in God, but there were things that got in his way, things he had to deal with. Remember, he'd been to war. He said the war, the burnings, like we never focus on that word. Imagine what that means, burnings, like seeing whole towns burn down. Just imagine the horror of watching that. Chicanery. It's like people just treating each other really badly. He said, these things made me sick. And then he said, judging from what I've seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss. Bill had been through a lot of calamity and he was stuck. Like, why all the suffering? And he earnestly questioned it. And what did Ebby do? Well, he didn't do what I probably would have done, like get into this big theological debate about, well, does God cause suffering or just allow it and blah, blah, blah. Ebby's way smarter than me. He didn't do any of this stuff. He basically says, Bill, I don't know. All I know is God is good. And when I surrendered my life to him, the obsession to drink was just taken out of me. And, I guess that's how we can deal with certain things that I don't understand. I don't understand why God allows human trafficking. I mean, that one breaks my heart. Like, I used to think, why doesn't God just smite all the traffickers with a plague of boils? But since then, I realized, you know what? If I think there's something wrong there, then I better be praying for these traffickers to have a change of heart, and not just complain. But I can wonder, why did my dad suffer with Parkinson's? And then after my mom, nursed him until his death, she got stricken with Alzheimer's. Like, I don't know. And I have to be content not knowing this side of heaven. Hopefully then I will, but not now. I just trust that God has a plan, and it's okay if I don't understand it. So what does Ebby do? He simply tells Bill God did for him what he could not do for himself. He said, I had admitted defeat, and after admitting defeat, I had been raised from the dead. Right? Isn't that like us in the illness? I know I felt like I was a living dead person, that I could be in a room with 100 people and feel like I was the only person on the planet. Ebby said he was suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. So that means if we think of the best moment of our life in the illness, worst day in recovery is still better. He was rescued from the scrap heap to a life of meaning. And he says, had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. Same with me. I had no power, but there was a power that Ebby was able to access, that I was able to access, that everyone here is able to access the power of God. I don't generate electricity myself, but I can access it. Bill knows he's hopeless. He's open-minded. And he says, maybe these religious people are right after all, because this Ebby isn't the same Ebby. And he says, I love this line, my ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. Great tidings just means good news. I mean, when we think of miracles, we think of things like Moses parting the Red Sea, big dramatic Sunday school stuff like that. And Bill was saying, yeah, that's all in the past. Great. Well and good for Sunday school. But here sat a miracle directly across my kitchen table. A man who was once a caterpillar, who's now a butterfly. That's the kind of miracle I can be interested in. And that is our only solution. The definition of a miracle is a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific law and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. Miracle across the kitchen table. He saw Ebby was totally different. Page 12, he says, his roots grasped a new soil. It's like he had a root transplant. He became a different person. But he's still not sure. He's still a little prickly. And his friend says, why don't you choose your own conception of God? And he said, that did it. All I had to do was be willing. Nothing more was required of me to make a beginning. So willing to believe there's a God. Okay, what does that mean in practical terms? If someone's sitting here saying, I'm not sure there's a God, but okay, I'm willing, and okay, I'll go with God. Can't be a doorknob or a light bulb or the group, but a creative intelligence underlying the totality of things, like the big book says, a spirit of the universe, a creator. What do we do? So I think we can do this. We can say a prayer. We can say, God, I don't know if you exist, because that's honest, right? We always want to be honest with God. So we can say, God, I don't know if you exist, but I hope you do, because I'm hopeless. And if you do exist and you do care about me, like these people say, I really need some help. And in the meantime, I'm going to try to live my life I think you would want me to if you existed. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to help others. And I'm going to look for evidence that you're real. And if you are, please help me and please show me. The worst that happens is there's no God and we're talking to dead air. But I believe a prayer like that gets heard right quick, and that God calls up a team of angels and tells them to spring into action, because the next search and rescue mission is going to be for that person. Willingness. We can be willing to believe that there's a God who can restore us to sanity. Bill says, I was convinced God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. Well, what's enough, right? Enough to do the step work, not just sit there and say, okay, God, I'm willing to believe you exist. Now come out of your bottle, grant me my 3 wishes, then go back in your bottle and leave me alone. No, we have to be willing to do the work. And how does Bill describe it? He says, at long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. His willingness and God's willingness to be found by Bill just met, and Bill knew. He said, pride and prejudice dropped from his eyes. What's pride? Thinking too much of myself and thinking of myself too much. And what's prejudice? Thinking too little of others and thinking of others too little. He says, yeah, when I was younger, I needed and wanted God, and he came. I sensed his presence, but it was blotted out by worldly clamors. So if we want to blot God out, all we have to do is be too concerned with our jobs, what other people think of us, what our grown kids are doing, all the things that are none of our business, worldly clamors. Um, then Bill went to the hospital. Well, why? He said, I showed signs of delirium tremens. That's why he went to the hospital, because it was physically dangerous for him not to withdraw from alcohol without medical help. By the way, I looked up today, how long does it take for like a sugar addict to get the sugar out of their system enough so that they can understand what's being spoken to them? 2 hours. And that was actually my experience. I was binging right before a meeting. I sat through a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, I got a sponsor and said, I'm willing to do whatever you tell me. So if anyone's binging now, you don't need to wait 48 hours or any amount of time. You can take my number, take the number of people who've put their info in the chat that they're available to help. And remember, by September 14th, you could be the Ebby for someone else. So Bill's in the hospital. He says he humbly offered himself to God as he then understood him to do with me as he would. He said, I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. It's basically saying, God, I believe you're good, or at least you can't mess up my life any worse than I've messed it up myself. So take all of me, not just my food, all of me. I place myself 100% under your care and direction. And then what did Bill do? He cleared away the wreckage of his past. And look how he described it. He says, I ruthlessly faced my sins. He recovered in the Oxford group. They called them sins. We call them character defects, same thing. He said he was ruthless. He was hard on himself. You know, being hard on ourselves gets a bad rap these days. Our therapists are always telling us, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. But I don't know. Bill says he ruthlessly faced everything. I think it's okay to be hard on ourselves because we know that once we ruthlessly face our character defects and go to God and ask for his forgiveness and ask him to remove our defects and we make amends, we're good. We're good with God. It's okay. I can admit when I mess up because I know that God loves me. So there doesn't have to be any shame or guilt, but we have to be ruthless in facing these things. And Bill says once he did that and made his amends, that's it. He didn't drink anymore. From that day Ebby came in, he didn't drink anymore. And he gives us a little advice. He says, okay, I have this new God consciousness. That's the promise of this program, right? We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Common sense becomes uncommon sense. That's a result. That's the fruit of working this program. We intuitively know what to do. And then it tells us how to handle doubts if we're unsure. We sit quietly, asking, that means praying, only for direction and strength to meet our problems as God would have us. So when we're not sure what to do, before we pick up the phone and call 17 people, we should get quiet and ask God. And then Ebby tells him, when you do these things, you will enter upon a new relationship with your Creator. You'll have the elements of a way of living which will answer all your problems. And I think that's really the mission statement of this book, to get a new relationship with our Creator, where He's God and I'm not, and I'm surrendered to Him. And that by working this program, I have the elements of a way of living which answer all my problems, my marriage problems, my work problems, my kid problems, my health problems, all my problems. This program teaches us how to deal with them. So Bill tries to sum up what's necessary to recover. Belief in the power of God, not just the existence of God, the power of God, plus willingness, honesty, and humility. He says these are the essential requirements. But by the way, if I just have willingness, honesty, and humility without the power of God, then I'm just doing self-improvement work. And I didn't have the power to improve myself. I couldn't stop eating on my own. I couldn't stop being a mean, nasty person on my own either. So Bill says, it's simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. The destruction of self-centeredness. The root has to be destroyed. Remember, when he saw Ebby, he says his roots grasped a new soil. It's like we need a root transplant, right? From the garden of self to the, I don't know, the garden of God and helping others. We need a root transplant. So Bill's in the hospital and the thought came to him. I love how it says that. The thought came, like already God is directing his thoughts. He thinks there are thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. Little did he know, shortly after this, about 6 months or so, he just happened to be in Ohio on business, and he just happened to make a phone call that led him to Dr. Bob, who he freely helped, and they helped alcoholic number 3, and on down the years to us, sitting here on a Zoom meeting on a Monday night. And I want to highlight the bottom of page 14, I think one of the most critical paragraphs in the book. It says, faith without works is dead, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic, the compulsive eater. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through blank and blank. Now, if I were going to fill in the blank, I would have said prayer and meditation, but that's not what it says. It says through work and self-sacrifice for others, he couldn't survive the certain trials and low spots and would surely drink again, guaranteed to drink if I don't enlarge my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Now, other people may be able to enlarge their spiritual life through just prayer and meditation. And believe me, I'm not putting down prayer and meditation. I do about an hour every morning. It's so essential for our spiritual lives. But we are people who, for whatever reason, in order to grow spiritually, need to, to work and to have self-sacrifice for others. That's how our spiritual muscle grows. In order to know if it's self-sacrifice, I have to be giving something up in order to help another person, giving up something I want to do to help someone else. So Bill said, I did this work, but sometimes I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. So they're saying once we go through the steps, we're not going to feel on cloud nine all the time. We're still going to get resentful. We're still going to get self-pity, but we can't stay there. Now we have the tools to get out of them. And the biggest tool, when all other measures fail, work with another alcoholic will save the day. It is a design for living that works in rough going. I guess there's certain types of cars, right? There's Fords, there's Chevys, there's Ferraris. They're made different ways. They run differently. And when God made us, the addicts on his assembly line, he created us in such a way that when we're plagued with self-pity or resentment, helping others makes us feel better, makes us feel amazingly lifted up and set on our feet. So he finishes by saying the joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty, and saying that we can be happy even when things are hard. In the span of a couple weeks, my mom died, my husband lost his job, and then my husband had his second heart attack. And I was fine. Bad situations, hard situations in my life do not define me and do not dictate whether or not I will be abstinent. They say there's scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. That's what's so great about this fellowship. If we have a problem, there's probably somebody in this fellowship who's had the same problem and maybe even mastered it and can help you along so that you can master it and help someone else along. Page 16, last page of the chapter. He says, an alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature, but it's our job to love them anyway. That is the measure of my spiritual experience. I can tell how rotten I'm doing when I look at someone who's struggling and don't feel compassion for them. That's when I realize I still have a long way to go in my spiritual development. And they say recovery is fun. We're earnest, but we have fun. Like we shouldn't be showing up to meetings, or to work or to a family event with long faces. It's like life is great. We have been rescued. Faith works in us 24 hours a day. And he says, we don't have to look any further for utopia because we have it. Utopia is an ideal place. And he ends his story by saying, each day, my friends, simple talk in our kitchen when he was drinking. But Ebby came and gave him the solution. It says, each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. God sent a recovered friend to Bill, and Bill followed a set of simple, but not always easy guidelines that allowed God to come in and do a miracle of healing on him. Because at the end of the day, what worked for Bill and what works for all of us hopeless compulsive eaters is a miracle. God breaking into our human existence, rewiring our hearts so that the illness of compulsive eating can't touch us. And with that, I will pass.